So welcome to this conscious learning webinar. We are here today with Chris, who just finished his master's thesis in visual and media anthropology in Berlin. We also have among us some folks who have been working together with Chris on his research on the topic of hope, despair, and activism among deep adapters. So perhaps, Chris, we can start off with you just giving us a really short introduction to what it is that you've been researching, just what is it that has moved you through this research?
A really short introduction is always difficult, but I'll do my best. So I was doing research on another topic, and we had different seminars in one of our 3-week courses that we sometimes have. And one of our lecturers was trying to convince us all to change our topics to something climate change related, basically. And I think that was a bit the beginning where I started to feel like the research I was doing, was just not good enough in a way, because it was not related to the climate. And I became more and more anxious because I then also read more about the climate, and I became more and more anxious myself and felt like I can't not work on this actually right now as an anthropologist. I felt like I need to do this also for myself. And that's how why I joined the Extinction Rebellion here in Berlin first, with the very imprecise idea of researching emotions in relation to the climate change, to the climate crisis, and how to deal with them, basically. And I was doing that for, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 months, maybe. It was just after the second wave here in Berlin. So there was not a lot happening, not a lot of people were around. So I was not entirely happy with this, just because the energy was not there. But that kind of got me a bit more into reading about environmental things and so on. And that's also how I then read the Deep Adaptation paper. And I was looking for deep adaptation related things a bit within Extinction Rebellion, then started to also get very interested in the future, because I was also feeling that a lot of, that's not now concretely about Extinction Rebellion or anything. I just thought like a lot of initiatives don't necessarily so much have a vision of the future. It's more like they know what they don't want, and which I think is valuable as well. But that was just what I realized then, and became interested in the future and deep adaptation kind of at the same time. And that's how I got into Camp Collapse, because there was this workshop that I just had this epiphany, that I called it, but it was that I'm interested in the future. It was not a very profound epiphany, but it felt like an epiphany. And that's when I saw this workshop called Post-Climate Futures, which was the first Camp Collapse workshop, I think, ever, that I later found out. Yes, and that's where I joined Camp Collapse. And the meeting, the workshop was really funny already, because I started talking to Ricardo, who's also here, even before it started. And I was not aware that he was the facilitator. And I was thinking, wow, that is nice. Here I have very good conversations about deep adaptation and other things that I have read. Yeah, and then at some point he was like, okay, now let's start this workshop. And he went to the front and started the workshop. Yes, that's how I got into Camp Collapse. And then more and more, that became my my research, my field site, so to say.
Thanks. So you've mentioned Camp Collapse. Can you tell us a bit more, and perhaps some other people here who are in Camp Collapse? Can you tell us a bit about what is Camp Collapse, and yeah, what do you people do over there?
So actually, maybe we should start by introducing the Camp Collapse people who are also here. So we have Danny, which is waving now. Hi, Danny. And we have Ricardo, who I don't see on my screen here, but he's somewhere. Are you here, Ricardo?
I think Ricardo is here, but video is off. I don't know if Ricardo can hear us.
Ricardo is mobile, so it will take a little bit. But hi.
Okay. Hi, good to know. So, yeah, what is Camp Collapse? So when I started there, it was 6 people. And the idea was to create a live action role-playing game to bring more awareness about the climate crisis. And yes, that is, I mean, the urgency of the climate crisis, especially. And the workshop I took part in was, yeah, just these future scenarios, basically. That was based on David Holmgren's future scenarios, but there were more different future scenarios where we would imagine the future, and there was always a collapse happening. So we had this grid of environmental and societal collapse, and basically we imagined the future with collapse already in this first meeting. So we started with workshops mostly, but since then, especially since maybe a bit more than a year ago, we have started doing a lot of other things. And one thing is, or are now, performances. So that was when Danny actually joined us, which was, it's a funny story in itself. Yeah, we had this opportunity to do a performance, and she was basically just coming to us because she had written an immersive theater before that was kind of similar to a role-playing that we did at an Extinction Rebellion online event. So that's how she heard of us, or we heard of her. I'm not sure which way around it was. And from then on, yeah, and then that was just when we needed to do a performance. And from then on, we also started to do more performances. We have done an installation that was based on these stories that were written for the thesis and others that we have written ourselves. And now I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot of things, and then it can help me.
Sure thing. Yeah, so we call ourselves currently, depending on the audience, a creative activist collective. And we have different people with different interests, and we usually work that if someone wants to do something, they sort of say, oh, here's a date that we want to do this, who wants to help? So it's a little bit, it's decentralized as well. But yes, so we have workshops, games, and performances, and some installations as well. But currently we tend to do a lot of different things. Maybe too many different things, but it's great. We get very excited, and we love to try and, well, I can only speak for myself. I'm particularly interested in using these sort of experiences for change making, and how can you take people to the future and get them to think more critically about it.
Thanks, Danny. Dean mentioned in the chat that he missed the first word you used, something activist collective.
Creative activist collective. The other version is creative future collective. If we feel activists for some reason might put some people off. I changed it, but sometimes depending on the audience.
That sounds super exciting. So from what I understand, it's so using your imagination and inviting people to use their imaginations to project themselves in the future in different scenarios, and therefore use this creative and imaginative faculty to sense into the emotions that come up in us when thinking about the future, and how that so becoming more aware of what is happening in ourselves and the stories we have, is that correct? Or through those performances, for example, and games?
Yes, definitely. Sometimes I think it depends on the performance, but it's usually about asking questions, specific questions that might prompt a certain response. The one that we've done the most is Stories from the Future, where we are time traveling scientists who've gathered different news headlines from different universes from the future, and we want to make sure this is the right one. So we ask the audience, the public, about their current situation and these sort of future possible scenarios. Could that match this universe? And maybe get them to think, oh, maybe this could happen here. Yes, but with some of the workshops, for example, we've also started using the 12 characters in Search of an Apocalypse and adapted it to do more of an emotional reflection, which we do add a performative element of the monologues, but it's actually more of a sharing space. So yes and no.
Thanks. Do you want to share any things that have, I don't know, might have moved in people, you know, people coming to you afterwards and saying, oh, you know, I was really touched by that question, you know, that bit, or what kind of reactions have you gotten to those performances? And because I imagine it can sometimes be it could be slightly jarring for people, no, and based on how they see the world, depending on how they see the world.
Yeah, that's something we, of course, also always talk about when we do these performances. I mean, it's always what audience do we have, what where do we want to go, and how can we. I mean, one example is we did one performance at one point within an Extinction Rebellion demonstration, and we didn't want to go with the pessimistic ending of like, I'm sorry, we're not in the right universe. It's the change is not big enough. Like you're trying, but it's just not going to do it, which is the usual ending. But yeah, there we didn't want to do that, and it.
Well, actually, sorry to interrupt, Chris, but what happened was they responded more positively to all of our questions than any other normal audience. So we would ask these, does this match the universe? Yes, it can happen here. And we were like, oh, okay. So it was
that's true. That was the thing. Like the enthusiasm of we're in a demo and we can change things. And then when we said, could this be your future? It's like, yes, it could be. And if we do it elsewhere and you ask, it's like, okay, with the questions we ask, is water going to be scarce in Berlin? Maybe the people are like, yes, probably it is. Yeah, and the question is it getting warmer? Yes, it is. So yeah, that's true. There was a bit of a funny thing there. People were too enthusiastic and not in a mindset to that our performance could have worked.
And how? So do you integrate how deep adaptation as a framework in any way in those activities that you do? Perhaps for performances it's a bit more tricky, I suppose, but for other formats, have you experimented with encouraging people to consider, you know, some of the main questions of deep adaptation and so on?
Yeah, to me it's always there. I don't know how to really describe this. It's often not explicit, but yeah, I would really say everything we do is somewhat informed by deep adaptation in some way, but then I also wouldn't say that that's necessarily due to deep adaptation, if that makes sense, because there's so many other frameworks and things that go in similar directions, and I just think this is where we would have gone anyway, and I think deep adaptation just is a very good framework that kind of it's a very good holistic framework where all of these things to me are already in a bit, and I think this is why all of us, I mean, Danny and Ricardo as well, I think found this an attractive framework, because I think it just, my thinking was like that a lot in many ways, but this gave a narrative and a structure to it.
If I can add on that, maybe like one thing that's very easy to say is that like whenever we start to think of something, whether it is a performance or a workshop or something, and we're like, oh, we need a structure. And then like one of the first thoughts is always, oh, why don't we look at the 3 or the 4 R's? And, you know, even for a performance, it can be relevant, you know, like depends on how you think of it. Like it could be the different phases that you want to consider, and then how do you manifest that into a reading or a body movement or something like this.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, that clarifies things. I have so many questions I want to ask about Camp Collapse and about your thesis, Chris. And I'm realizing that it's already 1/2 and I also want to let everyone be able to participate more. Wendy, did you have anything you wanted to touch on right now, or it's
There was I'm just looking for the exact words in your thesis, Chris. There was something that just hit me really strongly. You said in the very first chapter, I'm a realist in the sense that even though I reject a positivist notion of an objective external reality, my approach remains realist. And I found this really strong because your thesis to me was on balance investigating hope. And I don't know if I have a question, but I just wanted to say that's very interesting to me, is that you're playing with imagination, but it sounds like you're coming from a very realist look at what was in front of you. Does that speak at all to?
I think I need to digest that sentence first.
Okay. I don't have an easy question, but yeah. I wonder if you want to speak a little bit about what you spoke about in some detail around the question of hope.
Yeah, okay. Well, hope to me was also something that was relevant from the beginning, because I was very anxious and I was thinking about hope, and I was thinking, yeah, sometimes I was laying in bed at night and thinking everything is going to end anyways, and then of course thinking about hope, there wasn't much hope. And then when I read the Deep Adaptation paper, I was also still, I don't know, I feel like I had a reluctance to it in a way that many people have, probably when they first read it, if you haven't been into this topic at least a little bit before. And hope was also very much a thing that I was thinking about. I was also thinking about, do we need hope? What is hope even? And all these things that I write about in my thesis as well. And I feel like whenever I discussed this with people, it was always, the hope was always the argument. It was always like, yeah, but why would you say that? Don't we need to be positive? Don't we need to have hope? And in a way, the more often I heard that, the less it made sense, or the less it said anything, because it just became an empty phrase in a way. And that's what I saw again in these critics of, or criticisms of Deep Adaptation. And that just started to bother me also a lot, because yeah, I thought, well, you're basically just saying you need to have hope. This is a statement that you can't really quantify or qualify in any way, but this is the starting point. And then you say, because of this, we should not even talk about that. And yeah, I think this is why I also then read more about hope and things like that. And there's also, I haven't given up on hope, I would say. Like, I think this active hope that John O'Macy writes about, I can very much relate to, but I don't, yeah, as I think I say in the thesis, we just need to, when we talk about hope, I think we need to specify what we are talking about. And we don't just need to say, you have to have hope, because that to me just doesn't say anything anymore.
Thanks. So yeah, if anyone has any questions or comments you want to make on what you've heard so far, please go ahead. Maybe one, oh yeah, Gwen, go for it.
I'm very interested in the definition of hope because I've read some people talk about hope as too passive, that you just sit back there and hope. And I think it's important to think about activity. So I'm curious to have you say more about your definition.
Yeah, well, basically my definition is that I'm saying I'm not really going to make a definition, but I'm going to look at the definitions that we have from different also disciplines, because I don't want to define hope for anyone. Like, I think we can all define it for ourselves. But what I do in the chapter about hope is just show different perspectives, show what you just said, that some people say hope is passive and you just sit back and hope, yeah, hope for someone else to fix it, basically. But I also write about active hope, I write about radical hope. I mean, quoting mostly, but just to show these perspectives. And to me, I think everyone should have their own definition, as I said, but then also be aware of that. And when talking about hope with other people, maybe have a deeper conversation than as just like, we need hope because we need hope.
Yeah, there are so many different definitions. I really like the way in which you all the different kinds of hope that you explore in your thesis. Yeah, you mentioned quite a few, and many of them I had never heard of, and some really interesting angles. I'm curious to know whether Danny, Ricardo, Caitlin, if you can participate, has anything evolved in you as a result of being involved with Chris's research, maybe in terms of how you perceive your own hope, or your, what your vision of the future is? Anything might have evolved, and it's fine if nothing comes to you right now, but I'm just curious about this, as my research is on learning and how people influence one another as they interact. So, I don't know if Danny?
Yeah, I was trying to give space to if Caitlin wants. I mean, I can definitely say something, but I just wanted to not jump in first. But I will carry on unless. Okay. Yes, absolutely. I think it influenced me a lot, because also just giving time to think about and reflect on what I think regarding the future and deep adaptation and hope. I'd not really questioned myself on what that means to me, and I'm someone who actually defines more, explore what I think through discussing with other people. So for me, I actually found it very beneficial, and I learned a lot about my position then on it. And yeah, I think I am also in the active hope area, as it were. And yes, I found actually taking part in the research very beneficial for me in also reflecting on my own journey so far in general. And that was also very wonderful to do.
Thanks, Danny. Ricardo?
Missing the news button. I think this is the kind of answer that you're looking for. Through, let's say that I remember Chris's interactions have definitely influenced me and my vision and so on. And I think mostly through a lot of discussions. Like one very concrete example is that Chris is the one that, for those familiar with the Deep Adaptation framework that he forced me to think about the fourth R, because at the beginning I was like, puff, this privileged one, I don't want to think about it. And Chris, what I would say is that I mean, this is very much of a personal interaction, right? But that we had discussions that, as Danny said, that through our discussions, that it gave me more time to think about the words, the meanings, what they meant about it, to take the time to see how it actually made sense to me, to the usual seeing different perspectives, but also feeling a little bit about it. So I think it was simultaneously an intellectual as a non-intellectual, let's say, discussion experience. And I think, and one thing that it's not completely direct, but to me it's still a product of this, is that for me, one of the surprises, I mean, the whole camp collapse journey is very surprising. It's always interesting, but one of the aspects where I think Chris's influence was very important, at least to me, was in realizing the importance of the work and the activities that we do in creating the spaces to process the experience of these topics. That while I came very harshly into let's engage into this intellectually and push for something, a lot of our interactions were like, there is power in this, there is power in engaging in this topic in a different way, perhaps even for my intellectual goals, but perhaps in other ways as well. And so, like, being that right now we have done, I don't know, like three, 4, maybe more sessions dedicated to creating a space for, like, exactly in deep adaptation attitudes, to give space for people to embody their feelings about this topic. Yeah, I would say it's very much related to that. But anyway, I ramble.
Thanks a lot, both of you. Wendy has just come back after a short power cut. Welcome back, Wendy. Yeah, I'm wondering if anyone else would like to say anything, and even, you know, Chris, Ricardo, Danny, if you want to ask questions to, you know, any one of us, or just make comments, we can just keep it, you know, rolling. Anything that you'd like to follow up on.
I missed a bit, so apologies if this question's already been asked, but Chris, you mentioned that Camp Collapse is an affiliated part of Deep Adaptation. How can we join you, and what can we participate in?
That is actually a very good question. Because we haven't had a proper meeting in ages, and actually that's one of the things that's on our on our agenda, talking about how we better work together with Deep Adaptation, and how can you help us, and vice versa. So Danny wants to say something. I just also wanted to say I'm already very happy, of course, to be here and to be able to talk about Camp Collapse here, to have been in the newsletters and so on as well. So I think you're already helping us reaching more people in a way, and I'm sure there's different ways as well. And Danny maybe has an idea.
Yes, thanks. Well, in general, we do a lot of different activities, but we're quite reactive to different opportunities rather than strategically planning. Oh, let's do this workshop there. It's more like, oh, here's an opportunity, the Zero Waste Festival, or here's another opportunity. And so one thing we want to look towards is to have something more regular, that we can then come in touch with different people, some sort of workshop, and have a more clearer way of sharing that as well. So that is, watch this space. But definitely we would like to get towards this less reactive standpoint, because we do so many different things. But it'd be great to then take what we think we want to focus on and then invite you all to it.
That sounds great. Do you also do online workshops and events, or is it mostly in person?
No, we also do online. online things. We haven't in a while, but we generally do.
I think there was some online fatigue at one point when a few people
Yeah.
said, I don't want to do online anymore.
Yeah.
And now I think we're realizing, I think we're coming back to this online idea or hybrid. So yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, understandable. Thanks.
There's maybe one thing that I want to say, which is not so related to this because it's not online, but what I found interesting is with Camp Collapse that the longer I feel like we did things together and we're in this collective, what we talked about before with the emotions and stuff. I like Ricardo said, I brought that in a bit, and I do agree. But I feel like it then kind of automatically just got more and more important, and not necessarily even with when we do workshops or something with people outside of the group, but inside of the group. I mean, just this weekend we were kind of inside the group and had a little retreat where we also did a film shoot for another project. But then also I did an introduction kind of to Deep Adaptation, talked a little bit about it because I also wasn't sure how much the people in our group, because we grew quite a bit, I would say, in the last couple of 2 months or so. A lot of new people have come. And yes, there we also then did a truth mandala, which I'm sure some of you know, and some dance exercises, and the whole day more or less was structured along the spiral of the truth that we connect. So yeah, I don't know, I'm not quite sure what my point was, but just I feel this emotional, I think we have become a bit of a support group as well, I would say. And I don't think that was necessarily the intention in the beginning, but I feel like more and more that is also an aspect of it. I'm not sure if Ricardo and Danny have a comment on that.
So, go ahead, Danny.
No, I was just gonna say I missed the last bit because I was responding to Gwen in the chat. Sorry.
So a support group, you mean for yourselves, or how is it, like a mutual support?
Yeah, I mean, just like that, this community that we have, which I think is also a lot connected, that I think the people who are attracted to our group, that's something that I said earlier, I think these are mostly people who already are very much thinking in these ways. And it's just, yeah, community is just very, very important. And I feel like this, maybe that's just my feeling, but I feel like the more people that we attract as a group also, and the more we grow, the more this aspect becomes more important.
Right. Indeed.
This sounds like learning. You know, this is what we're all about. This is what we want to unpick and know about. And so, yeah, I welcome your insight into what you're seeing. So the intention of the group, which sounds like it was, what I heard is that it was more around the performance of the games and exploring the presentation or the media of your experience of deep adaptation. But the bigger that group gets, the more important it becomes, the relationships within the community. Or not?
Yeah, I would say so. And just also the more this sense of community, and what Danny said before with holding space and things like that, the more you just grow as a group, and the more I think you also feel more able to then have sessions that completely focus on emotions.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
So I wanted to go back to something that Ricardo touched on very briefly. So lots of what you wrote in your thesis, Chris, explored the intersection of collapse awareness and realizing, what's going on with questions of privilege, with colonization, and all those things. So yeah, do you want to? I'm not sure how to bring in this question, but have those themes become alive, or were they already alive in your group to start with? Has your research encouraged people to discuss those really difficult topics more frequently? How do you sense that? Any of you?
I find that hard to answer. I wasn't with the group from the beginning. I think it was there already when I joined, at least a little bit, certainly because of Diego, who I think always had it on his mind, because he's from Venezuela. Yeah, Ricardo, how was that in the beginning? Was that on your mind?
I mean, I'm trying to think. I mean, I would definitely say the topic is on. Yeah, I mean, well, for those who know me, know that it's not exactly the same thing, but that privilege is a huge topic for me. And so in some ways it was connected, but I think we have. I don't know. It's hard to put it. It's hard to think of something concrete. I think definitely it is. These are topics that we discuss in the group, and we discuss again simultaneously from an intellectual standpoint, and also from, you know, how does that make us feel? What is our connection to the topic? But yeah, I struggle to say to be aware of the journey in the group, and exactly like you, Chris, and like, do we just talk about it? Has it evolved from A to B, and are we more grown up or something? Yeah, poof, it's very hard to say, right? But I don't know. Maybe I think maybe it's kind of like the topic in general, that because we have a group and we talk about these things, that we become less apologetic about bringing this topic with the outside world. I don't know. Maybe that's just myself.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, I can't really speak for the group. I think it was there always a bit. It's not. I think it could be a bigger topic, even. Of course, always in a way. To me, it's just so related to climate change. Also, like, especially now, intellectually engaging with this whole thing. That, yeah, if you look at the history of colonization and fossil fuels and capitalism and all these things, it's I can't really keep it apart. So it's in a way, as a climate activist group, you need to at least be aware of it. And yeah, I'm not sure what our decolonization efforts are, except for within ourselves, but I think at least being aware of it and thinking about it and working on it is a must, I would say. Danny?
Yeah, from my perspective, in terms of my journey when I first joined Extinction Rebellion as well, I remember I had this view. We were doing sort of moment silence for something, and I was very much in that place. We should focus on this one topic about climate, and I feel that process of being there, I became so much more aware of the interconnectedness of everything, of the importance of decolonization, feminism, sort of anti-racism, everything. But through that, I actually then found Camp Collapse, which is then a bit more suited to that, I feel, because it was slightly more light touch aware. But I definitely feel through engaging more with Chris's thesis and Deep Adaptation, I became more solid in my, I don't want to say standpoint, because that sounds a bit too, but in my thinking of yes, this is, everything is so connected in this way, and it has to be a holistic approach. And I would say this has been reinforced in the last few months, definitely, from interacting with Chris's work, and more so with the framework and my thoughts on it. And to just touch upon this, what Ricardo said also, in terms of feeling more empowered to talk outside the group on these topics, completely. And I think that links to this support network idea as well, because we asked ourselves, some of us went on holiday together, and we asked, what's the difference between a normal holiday and one with collapse-aware people? And we had various different ideas on this. One of which, though, was, well, you're not in an echo chamber, because perhaps there's one element to it, but you feel more empowered and supported in exploring these topics outside, and you don't think you're crazy. You don't think, you realize that lots of other people have similar approaches, not necessarily exactly the same, but it really does empower you to, explore this with other people in a more, I wouldn't say safe way, but in a more pleasurable, not sure the word I'm looking for, but a better way.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't think of that, but that's really very much a thing. I mean, when I started work on this, I think I was like, yeah, with some people, do I really want to talk about deep adaptation? Oh, it's gonna be exhausting. And now I don't seem to be able to shut up about it. So I think whenever I meet new people, it's not going to take long. We're going to talk about the collapse at some point. So that definitely changed.
I'm sure many of us here can relate to that.
Maybe there's something to say that I mean, it's a bit of a slightly unusual experience, but what is it? Because of the performances, we got some, like, can we call them uniforms? Anyway, we wear things that on the back they say Camp Collapse, which, you know, it's what it is for a name. But what I'm very surprised is the amount of people that approach us and are like, wait, are you about collapsology? It's like, what? How? It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's true. We were talking about some point even, is that a good name? Do we need to collapse? And then we all agreed, yes, it's a great name, we need to collapse. But the reaction is, we were like, let's be a bit edgy and everything. And now it's more that actually people who have read about collapsology or deep adaptation are attracted to us because of our suits and our name.
Nice. So did you get many people join Camp Collapse to be able to wear the uniform, or?
Yeah, we joke about that. If you have a uniform, you're an actual proper member. But I don't think that's true. I don't know how many people we are now. We've been 6 for a long time now. It feels like we're at least twice as much. Yeah. 12, yeah.
We got more suits.
We want to see pictures of these suits.
Sure.
Oh.
I'll see if I can find one right now.
Yeah, I'm sure you can, Danny.
What I'm finding really interesting is that it sounds like, collapsology and now deep adaptation sound like something, but unless you've come in and read the paper or spoken to someone, they're not that meaningful. But that meaning is being spread more widely. So it's like a language is forming, a common language around this thing that we're talking about, that is no longer fighting climate change. Not that we're not doing that, but we are doing this other thing. You know, we're addressing this other huge thing that comes post the activism about climate change. And yeah, again, I don't have a question, sorry, because I keep dropping these things in. But I feel like your thesis is very, very helpful in pulling a lot of ideas together. And I just want to say all credit to you. I think you've done a superb job of pulling some pretty diverse thoughts that are out there, because I read your thesis a few times now, but the first time that I read it, I was like, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. Just big chunks of pulling together a lot of writing out there, and the flow of what's happened with deep adaptation, the critiques and things like that, just making sense of it. So thank you. I think you've done a fantastic job. And in one way, I think it's important that we share your work as widely as possible. I think it really helps. Following on from Jem's work, this is a really good part of the reading to do, to come into this space and have the language.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. That was also yeah, a bit of the aim, because what you said with this whole the critiques and everything, that is of course more or less a thought process that I went through when reading up on this. And also with the stories and everything, I feel like that's what I tried to do, to kind of structure it in a way that reflected my learning of this as well. And of course, yeah, also connecting to with the meditation that we did in the beginning in the session, like connecting, like kind of getting, because it is so personal, right? It's about me, and it's about the people in Camp Collapse, about Caitlin, Claudia, and Walter. It's all very personal, and I feel there needs to be a somewhat a connection with the reader as well. Now I got distracted, but I think my sentence was done. Yeah, so this is one of our performances at Potsdamer Platz. And yes, you can see me at the camera in the back. I'm not in the performance. And then Ricardo and Danny in the front. And we have Helena, Antonis, and Diego, and someone else on the other side.
Yeah, I'd like a suit like this too, please. They look, yeah, they catch the eye. Hmm.
Yeah, that is, it's very, very helpful on the street.
Mm.
And they keep you warm.
That's true, that they have also been helpful, but they also keep you too hot when you're inside.
Mm. Well suited to a harsh Berlin winter.
Yeah.
Outdoors. Okay. So I just want to check on time. We're now an hour into our event. And so what we've been doing so far with previous webinars is have those conversations going for an hour or so, and then keep the last half hour for reflections on what has come up for us in the previous hour. So just any things that we found interesting, you know, worth reflecting on, maybe some new ideas that might have popped up, or you know, some experiments we'd like to do. So we're still recording, but yeah, feel free to stick around if you can, and if you need to leave, then it's absolutely fine. But so we could just have a half hour to yeah, to reflect and share insights if we like. So Kat, you seem to be leaning towards your camera. Did you want to share anything?
I'm just expressed some gratitude and appreciation. It's been really interesting to listen to, and I love the photographs. The suits look like they do a good job of attracting attention. I'm grateful for the share of the thesis. I'm looking forward to reading that. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I recommend it to anyone and everyone. Yeah, one thing that came up for me, which yeah, we also touched on already, is this idea that after a while being in community around this kind of topic, then this notion of mutual support almost naturally emerges. And I find it super interesting because, I mean, this is what deep adaptation is all about, and how I would understand it. Right? Is being together in the face of this whole predicament, and yeah, how it's possible to face it without running away and having those individualistic kind of protection instincts. So yeah, I just find this really interesting. I'm wondering if anything, if there's anything Wendy or Chris, Danny would like to share.
I can share just for anyone who hasn't listened to them yet. The recordings of people's stories. And maybe Chris, you can talk a little bit about how those came about. So I think your interviews, well, you can tell the story, but they're fascinating to listen to. It's like, yeah, we did the meditation, but that was really helpful for me to start really processing this. I mean, I feel like I've done a lot of deep adaptation work, but then there's this next step of what will it actually look like? And that's opened something new for me. And I'm going to use a word now, it's kind of hopeful in a way, because it's kind of drawing a picture of something that exists in the future, in that way hopeful. Some of them are pretty negative, you know, in a discomfort kind of way. But I find it incredibly useful. And I was going to ask you, do you know of Rob Hopkins' work from Transition International? He's
I've heard of his name, but I haven't read anything.
Really? Transition Towns is very hopeful, right? They were trying to address the fossil fuel peak. So peak oil, what will happen after we get to peak oil, which we probably did in 2006. But he and a team, and one of them, Naresh Giangrandi, is actually on the holding group of Deep Adaptation. So we're quite closely philosophically. Rob Hopkins stepped away from Transition, I think 2 years ago, to take a sabbatical, because he felt that the practical work that they were always all about doing was no longer really, I mean, this is my understanding of the work that I've read that he wrote. And he investigated and did a lot of research around imagination. And he's written a book. And he says, our problem is we don't have the imagination to picture, and we train it out of people. We educate it out of children. We don't picture where we could go. And that's why nothing is happening, because no one can imagine the future different to the current.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful. And it's not his original idea, obviously, but he's trying to. So there's a book which you might be interested in.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. I need to check that out. And yeah, that is actually a point that we have not talked about at all, and that was very important in the thesis is the stories. And yeah, you asked how that happened. I think I talked about my epiphany that I want to research the future earlier. I think that was just about that time, probably a bit after this first Camp Collapse meeting, and I just thought, okay, let's just collect stories about the future. And I shared with this, I had like 3 story stems that we could, so either diary, a letter, or a sentence with a time machine. And I shared them in Extinction Rebellion, I think, and other channels, and all the Deep Adaptation channels that I was already in like Facebook. And interestingly enough, most of the stories that were, I mean, of course, some were just not even in the future, right? So what always happens when you just collect something. But some of the stories that were really stories and well written, a lot of them came from Deep Adaptation, and that was an interesting thing to begin with. And then I just also realized that they were, yeah, as you say, they were not completely hopeless. And of course, there's some dark stories with them. But yeah, that was just when I was starting to engage with Deep Adaptation. And I was, as I said, not quite settled on this whole question yet either. And I think that was interesting to see in these stories. And that was, I think, a first learning in how hope is looked at in Deep Adaptation. Yeah, and then we just basically decided to work with these stories further. So the performance we talk about, stories from the future, is that the first stories that we wrote were just based on a sentence from stories that we collected before. And yeah, stories kind of stayed with us since then anyway. So also this installation that we talked about earlier, that's basically pieces of string that present timelines, and then you have stories set in the same universe on this string, and people can write new stories. And what else I feel also, yeah, it's just become a bit of a thing. And I also think storytelling is, yeah, very important in what you said before. It's this, yeah, we can't imagine, yeah, somehow we can imagine the world to end before we can imagine the end of capitalism, is what I think I read that somewhere, but this really stayed with me because, yeah, we need to be able to, yeah, imagine an alternative, I think, otherwise.
Exactly. It's
No.
yeah, I very much resonate with what you said. It feels like stories are how we make sense of the world to a large extent, right? Even though we might not call them stories, but it's actually how we project ourselves. Danny, did you want to?
Yes, and to link to what Wendy was saying about creatively thinking about the future, what we actually have on our website, we have Camp Collapse, your time traveling experience, you know, that we encourage you to think about the realities of the future, but also help you envision, okay, well then what do you want in, you know, given the situation, and then, okay, and then how are you going to get there? We're still exploring how we actually manage all these different levels, such as the practical side of how you're going to get there. Although we do link with another project who are trying to work with a transformation center, where they're trying to bring all the different skill sets for more resilient Berlin into one building, and they're building a community there. And that helps a bit on that more practical side. But as we mentioned, the importance of at least having imagination to be able to think about what can you see, where could you go? Yes, it's definitely a very big thing for us, and I think it is a part of most of our activities in some form or other, very much so.
Yeah.
And then in terms of reflection, yeah, the main thing that's really hitting me is that I'm feeling so glad to be here with all of you. And actually, I'm thinking, why didn't I do this before? Like, I only joined the Deep Adaptation Facebook group like 2 weeks ago, even though I've been engaging with the paper and the topic for much longer. And I'm just feeling very, grateful, but also excited to, have all these faces here and even more people to connect and discuss and not necessarily support, but perhaps. And I'm feeling very moved by that. So thank you.
I have to say thank you. Thank you very much, both of you. I mean, these stories, I was listening again in preparation for this interview and discussion with you. And I was listening to the stories. I actually listened to all of them, I think 2 or 3 times last night, because if you put SoundCloud on, it plays in a loop.
Oh, yeah.
And when the new voice came up, I'm starting to recognize which voice is doing which story. They are quite profound, actually. I mean, just those ones that you've done. And I can imagine if you build a bigger body of those, there's quite a profound thing that happens, because storytelling, I mean, I think there is a lot of research that's already been done. Is this storytelling is a thing about how we function and how we build culture that we've come so far away from. So our storytelling is the mass media at the moment, which is horseshit. It's really terrible. And this is the story that we keep hearing, you know, all these garbage about Boris and I don't know what, you know, just nonsense. And so we don't have stories to have imagination and heroes' journeys and you know, villains' journeys, and it's profoundly important in my opinion. And Danny, I just want to say that maybe this is not a small thing. Maybe this work that you're doing to encourage imagination is a huge thing, and it's enough. You don't have to put the practical in place, because there are many practical people and a lot of engineers with, you know, if we give them the right direction, if we say we want to go over there, they'll find a way. My God, the things that people invent and create and put 2 technologies together, so much of this is possible. The problem is at the moment they're doing it for money, for people like Jeff Bezos and the pharmaceutical companies. We need to change the story. And I really would recommend that you reach out to Rob Hopkins, read his book, and maybe reach out to him and chat to him and see if there's some. He also starts, by the way, Chris, in his conferences, he starts with a meditation.
Oh.
You're walking down the road and it's 20, I don't know, I think he gives you 20 years or 30 years or something. You're walking down your road. What do you see? What do you smell? What do you taste? What is the air? You know, who is with you? It's really, I get goosebumps, you know, it's quite profound.
Yeah, that sounds, it's always funny when you hear about something that you didn't know about. And it's like, oh, how, yeah. and you did more or less the same thing or something very similar. That's how Jem also probably felt when he heard about collapsology people.
Exactly. Dorian, you and I were talking about this, about these things that float in the ether, that is an idea whose time it's appropriate to land, you know, and different people are listening, and so they hear maybe in a different language or use different words, but it's the same. Yeah, Chris and Danny, I as an elder, you know, I've had the privileges and the time. I'm really strongly supportive of your work. Let us imagine how the future can be better for you and your children. Absolutely.
Same here. I'm wondering if Anya, would you like to share with us what you wrote in the chat? Ursula Le Guin's carrier bag theory on story, if you're able to speak. Because it rings a bell, but I can't remember what this is about.
Yeah, it was just what Wendy was talking about now, about narrative and story and the kinds of stories. And Ursula Le Guin, she has a nice little essay about how we're so obsessed with this hero story, about the bashing and the killing and the straight line and going towards the goal, and how that is shaping how we see the world and understand the world. And the stories we tell, we will have to follow that pattern. And where she says, well, what if we imagine, or like the first people, surely it was equally important to have a container that was just as important as having a stick. Maybe it was more important to have a container than to have a stick. So what would happen if we think stories as containers rather than as an arrow or a stick or a straight row? What if we think more in these sort of containers that can hold all kinds of things? So that was just, it reminded me of that. I'll try and find it and post it in the chat, but otherwise you can, I think it's available online fairly easily.
It's really interesting because I also came across that story, like this little essay, in one of the workshops that I took part in because of time collapse. And I also found it, I really liked it. And what I also saw in that is that's like this, so like 2001 is one of my favorite movies, but there you have this, the apes, and then they find the first weapon, and basically that's the dawn of mankind. I never thought about it, like how terrible that is, before I read this essay, where it's like, well, the first tool surely must have been a container to pick berries or whatever and bring them back to your tribe. So yeah, I really like this essay, and I think also in this kind of the origin story of humanity in a way, if you look at that also shows how powerful stories are and can be, and where they lead. Yanni?
Yeah, I don't know the essay, but I'm going to read it now. But it really chimes to me because I have a lot of ideas on the importance of, yes, in this container, that as a reader, you know, the whole death of the author idea, that if you have everything in there, someone enough different content, the reader can take what they want from it. And so rather than saying, this is the journey you have to go, by having this container, you can actually have your own journey within the story in terms of based on your own lived experience. And if there's enough complex content, you can really have a very wonderful interaction with that. It's very personal to every single person.
I love this idea of journeying through a story. In a way, it feels like it's a collaboration between the storyteller and the listener, isn't it? In the same way that any journey or travel is a collaboration between a landscape and people in this landscape, and a person or people traveling through that landscape, isn't it? So yeah, I really like this this analogy. And Anya just shared with us Ursula Le Guin's essay. Thank you so much. Yeah, stories as containers. I wonder to share those containers more widely, how to make more people listen to those stories or start paying attention to them. Is that a topic that has been explored also in Camp Collapse? How to invite people into stories? I mean, this is what you're doing all the time, but
I mean, that's kind of the immersive aspect then, right? Yeah, that's always a thing. I mean, that's kind of Danny's domain. She already did something like that, which I said is kind of why she found to our group in the first place. I think it's always something we always think about when we do things like what we just talked about, that it's not really immersive. I know, Danny, sorry, it's interactive, but even the last workshop we did, yeah, we just put in some performative elements, and like that's not, I know that's not immersive, but it's like we always want to do something immersive, and even if we can't do it because it's a workshop, then it's at least we want to try something. So I think immersive is like the highest goal, so to speak, and at some point we're gonna also achieve it. But right now we have to settle for something a bit less. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, yeah, engaging more, reaching stories to more people. I mean, yeah, it's ultimately it still is about being engaging and entertaining in some level. I think because someone only, and as well as having content, not just surface level content, you know, substance. But how do we, yeah, spread these stories more widely? I think that's why we ended up taking so many opportunities that we overwork ourselves a bit and get a bit too not so strategic about what we're doing. Because like, oh, we can go there, go to the climate camp, and we can go to, well, they don't need, well, everyone needs to tell stories, I suppose, or we can go to this press launch day, and we can go to the festival for the, no, the carnival for the future, and we're doing street performances to engage normal passers-by, and work with Patagonia to do their street festival, and but is it, I think, more strategically thinking about, okay, how do we reach our audience, or who should we try and share these stories with, or how, I think would be our important next step for us, definitely, because I think right now we just sort of go where there's an audience, which I'm not sure is the most effective. But in terms of the method, yeah, there's a whole different list of ideas of what's needed, I think, to really engage people in something, to really critically think and perhaps change or question themselves, as well as imagine their futures. And I think it's asking questions, using entertainment, a bit of humor, having substance, and also having moments of distance as well as feelings.
Yeah, I want to say yes, I agree with that. We could think about and should think about how to engage more people with performances and things like that. And yes, we are reactive and chaotic and everything. But also, I think what I learned in Camp Collapse is that, you know, sometimes it's also the little, or yeah, basically when you think not much happened, when you had three people in a workshop or something, you can have a huge impact. And it's also then, I think I think a lot of people somehow stay in contact with Camp Collapse in one way or another if they have taken part in something. And I think that's also a bit because it's mostly so small and intimate. And so I think we definitely need to keep that. I think this yeah, is really what I learned, is that sometimes you can, yeah, you can just meet one person and it has, I mean, that Caitlin, if she's still here, is an example of that. When I organized a workshop for maybe 10 people online, and she was the only person who was showing up. And I didn't know what. Then was like, yeah, okay, what are we doing now? Let's wait a bit more. But then, of course, okay, you're still here, nice. Yeah, and then it was like, okay, but now that we're here, let's just talk for a bit. And then that's what we did for, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes maybe. And I've stayed in contact after. And yeah, I said earlier I was taking part in a workshop series where it was also about stories. And I at that time, I don't know, I didn't have time or whatever to really properly engage in it. So I asked her if she can do it. And then she did that, and also later wrote a text for my thesis, which is in the appendices. And there she also writes how much of an impact all of these things had, like basically, yeah, answering this writing prompt, then meeting me, getting in touch with a lot more collapse-aware people and so on. And I mean, I was obviously incredibly touched when I read that. In case you haven't read it, it's a recommendation. But yeah, to me, that just really shows how often something that we think, oh, that didn't go how it was supposed to, like a 10 people workshop, how we can actually maybe have a much bigger impact when things also go wrong, or yeah, when we just engage with the people then.
Yeah. So yeah, sometimes smaller numbers make the impact much greater on the people who are there, right? And then maybe they carry this somewhere else. So yeah, Danny.
Yes, completely. I just completely agree about how I think talking about ideas of like impact or legacy or what you leave behind, or sometimes it's not about building something or creating something. Sometimes it's also just about those interactions you have with people, and how something, even if yeah, you have only 2 people in your workshop as opposed to 50, maybe that impact is so much stronger, and you have a stronger connection from that, and have actually influenced something more altogether. Is yeah, this interconnected learning, as you've mentioned your interest in, completely, and that's, I think it's really beautiful actually. But I wanted to add, maybe in terms of Caitlin, also they then, after connecting with you, Chris, she joined the spin-off project, the Future Diaries podcast.
Oh,
You
yes.
probably mentioned that.
Yes, that was exactly, yeah, that was the project that came out of this workshop, basically, that she then joined, and that's Antonis from our group, Caitlin, and what's his name? Mike, who was also in this workshop.
So how can we find this podcast? I'm sure Danny has a link.
Danny's going to share it.
She has
I'm
everything.
going to jump in here.
Oh, look.
Caitlin's
even quicker.
Caitlin's on it. We only have about 5 minutes of our allocated time, and I'm just curious to ask, I can see that Caitlin is definitely listening, but we haven't heard from Ahmed, I think, and Christina, and I don't know if they are still listening, if they want to jump in and say anything, and Dean perhaps. Ahmed's good.
And it's optional, of course.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe they're happy to remain in silence. Oh, Dean, just unmuted.
Yeah. I also would just like to thank y'all for this conversation. It's very exciting. I've got an interview as soon as I heard Dorian's description of what Chris's paper was, and then I read it, and I immediately busily wrote him to see if he'd be willing to come on and be interviewed on my podcast, which is called The Poetry of Predicament. And this is exactly the kind of conversation that we have there. And I also want to thank Dorian and Wendy. I briefly mentioned it at the very beginning of the call. you know, I've been involved with deep adaptation since the beginning, and it's always been kind of not quite a fit. There's been a way in which I feel like I've been wanting to burst into a different dimension that that the organization just wasn't quite ready for, and I don't know, might not be quite a fit for it ever. I don't know. And it's doing wonderful things, providing what I consider entry level to the collapse aware conversation. I think deep adaptation is providing these incredible tools and environments for people who are new. And what I'm getting from Chris and gosh, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting all the names, but each of you from, you know, Danny, I'm seeing you on the screen so I can be reminded, each of you sharing, especially where it's creative and especially where I'm putting words in your mouth now, so I'm sorry, but there's this liquid state that is the words I would use for it, which is really the calling into something we don't know, that we don't know. We just have a feeling that this is the place to lean into. It's the place that we've been trained all our lives to avoid. It's the uncertainty, it's the mystery, it's the terrifying unknown. And each of you in your own way, from the name Camp Collapse, which just makes me laugh and cry in the same breath. There's a way in which each of you sharing has been kind of, it seems like you've got your own version of a liquid state that you're describing. Again, I don't mean to be putting words in your mouth, but this is what's occurring for me when I'm hearing you share. And for me, that is the vibrant zone. That's the place I put my whole body of work primarily there. And so why I'm couching that in my comment about Dorian and Wendy and this creation, even this talk right here, is it represents what, again, sorry, I'm projecting like crazy, but I'm saying that that's what Dorian and Wendy are doing. They're leaning into their version of the liquid state. It is not a passive kind of just acceptance and then we just figure out how we're going to sort out what we want to keep and what we don't and so on. No, this is an entirely different kind of activity. And it is so far, I love what you said about hope, Chris. I'm in a very similar wavelength, that there's this electricity when we set aside all that baggage that we now call hope. And we lean into this forbidden zone, this mysterious zone. And we do that together with a sense of communitas, like let's hold hands together when we jump. That's the feeling that I'm starting to get. So again, my hat's off to Wendy and Dorian. Thank you very much for opening up this whole new dimension in a very lovely community, this deep adaptation community, but for me was just not quite fitting. I couldn't feel that edge. You are bringing that, so thank you. And then for Danny and Chris and Ricardo, and I'm sorry, Sammy, I think. Thank you all for participating and bringing this, your version of that liquid state, of that liminal edge. And it's just been a joy. And so Chris, I'm writing you a long email in anticipation of our interview, and I'm just really excited that we get a chance to talk in not too many days from now. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dean.
Yeah, thank you, Dean. Just to mention, I reached out to Danny quietly on the messaging to say that perhaps we can talk a little bit about how we can bring some of this performance, imagination, storytelling, something that the Camp Collapse are doing to the larger deep adaptation audience in some way, in some online format that is usable and functional and manageable. But to me, it's so exciting. I would love to see something like that shared more widely.
Same here. Yeah, I really hope we manage to build more bridges and yeah, share those different forms of liquid states as Dean just mentioned. I really feel that what is happening with Camp Collapse is it feels really full of energy. Really, yeah, there's something really vital there. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to learning more about everything that is developing in Berlin, and perhaps new connections forming with other groups, other projects, other yeah, it all sounds really exciting. So well done with carrying all this, energizing it.
Thank you. And it's very nice to hear people being so excited about it. I also have to thank you for that, because that obviously gives us energy. I mean, I think that's the energy we run off anyway. And now also having that in an online place like here is very affirming.
Well, thank you so much for suggesting the idea of this webinar, Chris, and Danny, Caitlin, and everyone else here. Thank you so much for participating. So we're reaching the end of the time we allocated for this session. So I think I'm just going to stop the recording here, and then we could do a checkout.